He just got, it just wasn't cool. Like, whatever you think, it's just like, we have to be able to believe that.
Well, do you like Bernie? Are you friends with him or something?
No, I met him the other day.
Was that the first time?
It was the first time.
Were you impressed by him?
Yeah.
One thing, he's still sharp, right?
Oh, yeah, he's still sharp.
He doesn't suffer from what Biden did.
No.
Mental dullness.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean,
mentally gone.
Biden is
mentally gone.
He's somebody put a merry-go-round in his head, I heard. But that's, but they didn't plug it in. They didn't tell him.
Yeah.
Welcome back to Drop the Mask. This is episode 24, and I gotta say, I'm pretty proud of myself for going this long. I've read that 99% of podcasts don't last past 20 episodes, so I am the 1%. And 5 years ago, I never thought I'd be this deep into politics. I honestly hate politics. It's annoying. Everyone lies, and the only winners are the people at the top. And also, I hate talking. So, of course, the only natural thing for me to do was to start a political podcast and talk about it all the freaking time. No, but I am intrigued by how people behave around politics, how systems work, and in many cases, don't work. So that's what I'm trying to do here, is try to make sense of things that seem nonsensical, and then try to explain that to other people. Anyway, the nonsensical narrative continues in whatever hellish version of reality we currently live in. Last time I did a breakdown on a Bernie Sanders interview by the comedian Theo Von. The theme was healthcare and how the socialist solutions to many problems in the American healthcare systems are only going to make it worse. Then a few days after that came out, he did one with Donald Trump, and they talked about a lot of the same things. So I thought I would break that down and compare for a good back-to-back contrast. But before we get into that, there's been some news that I want to talk about. Some interesting developments have happened in the last couple of weeks, and of course, it's all about the upcoming election. I said I hate politics, right? And election season is the worst. I'm pretty sure every single political ad is a lie. But this is what we get shoved in our faces every day, so I have to talk about it. Maybe I can break the spell for a few people at least. So we're just about 2 months away from the most important election of our lifetime. You know that favorite phrase that they love to trot out every single election so that you vote out of fear and put off your real priorities, continuing the cycle of growing centralized power. I did a whole episode about that, the voting thing. It's episode 6 with my guy Derek Wills if you haven't seen it and you want to go check it out. But what's been going on this last week or so is that Donald Trump just picked up 2 major endorsements. 2 big-name Democrats are throwing their hats in the ring for Trump. I'm sure everyone knows by now, but it's Robert Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard. I don't know how much this is going to change anything, but it's interesting. And while certainly none of them are perfect, it does say something about the direction each party seems to be headed. I think it's bigger than just one guy. This looks like it could be a major realignment in the political world. And while I would never count on politics to solve anything, there's at least a tiny chance that that change is for the better. So first, let's talk about Tulsi. Tulsi Gabbard is a former congresswoman from Hawaii, and she was in the Democratic presidential race in 2020. And look, I have my disagreements with her, but she was easily the best one on that primary stage that year. She's measured, collected, and intelligent, and should be exactly the kind of strong female of color presence that Democrats claim they want. If they really cared about diversity and the power of women and showcasing somebody honorable in opposition to Trump, Tulsi should have been their nominee. But of course, the party wanted nothing to do with her. And on that stage, she pretty much ended Kamala Harris's chances at the 2020 nomination, putting her on blast over her record as district attorney in California.
I want to bring the conversation back to the broken criminal justice system that is disproportionately negatively impacting Black and brown people all across this country today. Now, Senator Harris says she's proud of her record as a prosecutor and that she'll be a prosecutor president, but I'm deeply concerned about this record. There are too many examples to cite, but She put over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana violations and then laughed about it when she was asked if she ever smoked marijuana. She blocked evidence. She blocked evidence that would have freed an innocent man from death row until the courts forced her to do so. She kept people in prison beyond their sentences to use them as cheap labor for the state of California. And she fought to keep cash bail system in place that impacts poor people in the worst kind of way.
Yeah, this is all true. Kamala was a state prosecutor, which is maybe the worst kind of lawyer. And people will say, oh, she's just doing her job. But it takes a specific kind of person to take that job. The job is not meant for good people. She's essentially a cop, in the same way that police are just doing their jobs by harassing people, beating them up, and occasionally murdering them. You're just not a good person if you're doing that job. It requires you to violate people's rights on a daily basis. You're an enforcer for the state, which is filled with evil tyrants. Even if you're the best person at home and a good family man or woman, which is rare because a crazy high percentage of cops are domestic abusers, you're still the muscle for the biggest criminal gang in the world. And I'm sorry if there's any cops out there hearing this, but I really recommend you think about a career change if you want to think of yourself as a good human being. But I'm getting off track here. I'll save Kamala and the police for another time. But just listening to her and Tulsi side by side, you can tell that Tulsi is a much more impressive person. And she just came out and endorsed Donald Trump. Her primary reason she talks about here is war. She's a veteran, she's been deployed in Iraq and Kuwait, so she knows how awful it really is. She's been staunchly against the regime change wars for a long time. And in this clip we're about to see, she says, Trump not only didn't start any new wars, but worked to end them. Here it is.
And we're living through this reality today as this administration has us facing multiple wars on multiple fronts and regions around the world, and closer to the brink of nuclear war than we ever have been before. This is one of the main reasons why I'm committed to doing all that I can to send President Trump back to the White House where he can once again serve us as our commander-in-chief. We cannot be prosperous unless we are at peace. And we can't live free as long as we have a government that is retaliating against its political opponents and undermining our civil liberties, weaponizing our very institutions against those they deem as a threat.
War is a big deal. Is that an understatement or what? Okay, maybe not, because the U.S. has been at war for 93% of its existence, 231 out of 248 years. Which means that we've only had peace for less than 17 total calendar years out of almost 250. So maybe it doesn't seem like a big deal to us because it's pretty much the norm, and it's not happening here. But that doesn't mean it's not horrible. The American government keeps provoking these wars because it makes them money. And Trump was not the non-interventionist we needed. To say that he didn't start any new wars is close, but not exactly true. Less than 4 months into his term, he called in some targeted missile strikes on Syria in response to a chemical attack that their president Bashar al-Assad committed on his own people, allegedly. Go see the guys at antiwar.com if you want all the details. They have a bunch of articles writing about it. But I have heard a lot of speculation that it wasn't what they said it was. And I remember at least one of the videos of the aftermath of that supposed attack was fake. But to the point, that was not a prolonged war, at least. So Trump wasn't great, but maybe he's a little bit better. That's got to count for something. And look at what we have now under Joe Biden. We're on the precipice of major wars with Russia and Iran, maybe even China, if the warhawks get what they want. Even if we're not officially fighting Russia, we really are. And today, the Democratic Party has become the war party. The Republicans are much better, that's for sure, but things are shifting. And it's just crazy to think that this is where we are now. The left had a reputation for being anti-war. The right are supposed to be the warhawks trying to, quote, spread democracy around the world. It's more complicated than that, of course, but that's kind of been the general feeling about it, about the two sides in my lifetime. Just to further highlight this shift that's happening, you can see the neocons are going the other way. This headline was going around in the last few days too, saying that 200 former Bush, McCain, and Romney staffers are endorsing Harris. On top of that, Liz Cheney, the daughter of Bush's Vice President Dick Cheney, who a lot of people credit as the mastermind behind lying the public into the Iraq War, she also just came out and said she's voting for Kamala Harris. These are some of the worst Republicans. This guy I follow on X, Joshua Lysick, always says that bad reviews from bad people are good reviews. And you can flip that around. I think, I have to say, it doesn't mean Trump is good necessarily, but it says something. The left used to refer to George Bush as a war criminal. Correctly, I might add. But now, the propaganda has switched, and they love him because, yeah, he might have implemented torture programs and killed millions and ruined multiple countries in the Middle East, but at least he doesn't say mean things on Twitter. And I guess the argument is that, well, Trump is just such a bad guy that they had no choice. We have to abandon all our supposed principles because of our democracy. But come on, I know you're full of it. First of all, if democracy is going to get you the guy that you think is going to end it, then are you sure democracy is good? And politics is not a good versus evil race. There's a reason that voting for the lesser of two evils has become a cliche around elections. But no, their behavior fits the theory that they want to continue the American empire, and they see Trump as a threat to it. Biden and Harris have embraced the Bush doctrine of never meeting a war they don't like. This is the bread and butter of empires. Their policy is consistent with continuing to ravage the poor and middle class to pay for their world-spanning money laundering schemes, which also happen to kill millions of people in the process. These are not the good guys. So as bumbling and incompetent as Trump might be in politics, there's something the regime is afraid of. Whether that's just cutting off their supply of murder and plunder or something else, I don't know, but it at least makes him intriguing. These are bad people from the right running to the other side to try to stop him. If you have all the right enemies, that's going to at least make me take notice. But moving on, it wasn't just Tulsi, but Robert Kennedy Jr. too. This week suspended his independent presidential campaign and came out in a somewhat reluctant support of Donald Trump. Part of his reasoning was wanting to put an end to the Ukraine war, which I really hope he does, we'll see. But his main focus was about health. Let's hear it from him directly.
Notice, for 19 years, I prayed every morning that God would put me in a position to end this calamity. The chronic disease crisis was one of the primary reasons for my running for president, along with ending censorship in the Ukraine war. It's the reason I've made the heart-wrenching decision to suspend my campaign and to support President Trump. This decision is agonizing for me because of the difficulties it causes my wife and my children and my friends. But I have the certainty that this is what I've meant to do.
So I don't know what's going on with his color here. I don't know if it's just the video, but he looks like he's been out in the sun for a week straight. Maybe he was trying to out-tan Big Donnie. I don't know. If you're just listening to this and you can't see it, he's a very dark reddish-brown in this one. But regardless, his message is that he wants to end the chronic disease crisis in America, along with ending the Ukraine war and the government censorship of dissident voices. And he's gone ahead and teamed up with Donald Trump against the wishes of his wife, Cheryl Hines, that actress from Curb Your Enthusiasm. I'm sure she's just a pariah in Hollywood right now. Even Kennedy's family members had to make a public statement that they do not approve of this, as if everyone in every family must be on the same page politically. It's just really sad. People are so conditioned to believe that Trump is this big evil dictator. I just spent time with my own family, and where we might have been similar 10, 15 years ago, we're so far apart now, it's like talking to aliens when it comes to politics. So I feel for him. That's got to be frustrating. But let's hear a little more from that speech.
President Trump has told me that he wants this to be his legacy. I'm choosing to believe that this time he will follow through. His son, his biggest donors, his closest friends, and all support this objective. My joining the Trump campaign will be a difficult sacrifice for my wife and children, but worthwhile if there's even a small chance of saving these kids.
Okay, so he's choosing to believe that Trump wants to back him on this. Now, I don't know what he plans to do to try to end the chronic disease crisis. He talks about how the food is poisoned, and yes, that's true. I expect he means to ban certain things or try to regulate the industry even more. And it's kind of hard to see the downside in this case, but like everything else, you might make some short-term gain now, but it's going to turn out worse in the long run. So I'm just not in favor of forcing people to eat or not eat anything. But there is a huge problem with the American diet. If you're new here and you haven't heard my episode with Matthew Leshak, go check it out. It's episode 14, or just go read his book, Fiat Food. It explains all about how the government teamed up with these big companies to regulate the market and make the unhealthy food so prominent in the United States so that they could cover up the inflation and the increasing costs of real food. So if RFK wants to loosen up the regulations, maybe that helps get more meat on shelves at lower prices. It's not going to make people stop eating Oreos and Doritos, of course, but if you make real food more easily available, that could do something. People can't afford to eat right because they made it so damned expensive. And then on the censorship aspect, let's hear from him on Tucker Carlson's show the other day.
37 hours after he took the oath of office, President Biden's White House opened up a portal for the FBI to begin to have access to social media posts on all the different social media sites. And the FBI then invited in the CIA, DHS, the IRS, and CISA. CISA is this new agency that is the center of the censorship industrial complex that is in charge of making sure Americans don't hear things that their government doesn't want them to hear. And they actually, Facebook pushed back in the email chain. You can see Facebook pushing back at the White House and saying, wait a minute, he's not, this isn't misinformation. This is not factually erroneous. What they're saying is actually true. And they had to invent a new word, which is called malinformation, which is information that is factually true, but nevertheless inconvenient for the government.
Those are some serious allegations, and he's right about this much. The Biden administration, as soon as they got into office, went straight to work trying to stifle anything on social media that they didn't like. This was during COVID, and they really did not want anyone questioning the so-called experts. Those experts that were either wrong or lying to us the entire time. The term malinformation he brings up is exactly what he says it is. It's information that's true, but the government doesn't like it. Either it makes them look bad or it's an actual threat to their power, because they only have power because so many people believe in it. And when you start to see through the cracks of the facade, you realize it's an empty shell. There's nothing legitimate about it. It's propped up on people's belief. I did another episode on Elon Musk and how mad the regime is about him and X opening up speech to the people that they deem unsavory. And it's not because they care oh so much about you getting the truth. They wouldn't care about some random person spouting crazy nonsense. They care when you undermine their authority. They'll claim it's about protecting democracy, but when they say our democracy, they mean their stranglehold on the world empire. And when the truth collides against their carefully constructed narrative, and you become a big enough voice to be heard, they're going to try to squash you. So I like what RFK is saying here. I hope that one at least is obvious to people. Censorship is never the answer. People need to be able to speak, even when they're wrong. But let's bring it back to health, because that appears to be his main focus here. He's written books about it, and I don't know if he's right about everything or not. People wrote him off as crazy because he's spoken about the lack of safety of vaccines and saying that maybe they do cause autism. But if you listen to him talk about it, it doesn't sound crazy at all. Again, I have no way to know if he's right, but he can make a good case. And it's not just about vaccines, though. The bigger problem, like we were talking about, is the food supply. Our food is poison, and that's what he wants to take on.
So what's causing this suffering? I'll name two culprits. First, and the worst, is ultra-processed food. About 70% of American children's diet is ultra-processed. That means industrial manufactured in a factory. These foods consist primarily of processed sugar, ultra-processed grains, and seed oils. Laboratory scientists who many of them formerly worked for the cigarette industry, which purchased all the big food companies in the 1970s and 80s, deployed thousands of scientists to figure out new chemicals to make the food more addictive. And these ingredients didn't exist 100 years ago. Humans aren't biologically adapted to eat them. Hundreds of these chemicals are now banned in Europe, but ubiquitous in American processed foods.
So all that said, it's good, but there's still something I don't quite trust about him. So if you remember, he had a short-lived flirtation with libertarians. He got people like Dave Smith and Clint Russell's ears to perk up a bit, and even spoke at the Libertarian National Convention. That was because he was rhetorically good on some very big issues like the war in Ukraine, like the COVID regime, two of the most impactful things that have happened in the world in the last 5 years. And he's a Kennedy. He's got the name recognition, so that was an interesting moment. But then he came out in full-throated support of Israel after the October 7th attacks, saying, "We must provide Israel with whatever it needs to defend itself now." And he talked to Dave Smith on his show about it, and this moment was really telling.
Okay, do you have concerns about the level of Israeli influence in our politics here in the United States of America?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know.
So whatever you think about the conflict over there, it's very clear Israel has far too much influence on American politics. If anyone in the government isn't 100% in support of their government, then the Israeli lobby will pour massive amounts of money into their opponent's campaign. And if he can't see that or isn't willing to admit it, then I don't trust him. That long pause was really revealing. You can tell he's calculating what he could or couldn't say. So either he's lying or he's not informed. And that's just a big red flag for me. So to tie that all back to Trump, these two are now on his team. Trump seems to be open to cabinet positions, at least for RFK. I don't know about Tulsi. He's got Vivek on his side already, too, and he's talking about Elon Musk coming on as a consultant to cut down the size of government. If you remember, Musk cut down like 90% of Twitter's staff when he bought it, and I would absolutely support that in government. And like I said, I don't agree with any of them 100%. I have some major issues with each one of them. But these are all people who are despised by the regime. It looks like Trump is really trying to stack the deck with anti-establishment people. And that was kind of the hope back in 2016, that Trump, with all his many flaws, would at least be against the system and do something, anything, to dismantle it. Just a little bit. But he was very disappointing on that front. He filled his administration with very establishment people, and that gave us terrible economic policy, continued wars, and of course gave us the COVID lockdowns. So look, I don't have much hope for anything real to get done. But where the left will continue the destructive direction of the country with 100% certainty, there's at least a tiny chance some good happens if Trump wins again. I really need to put this huge caveat, though, is that Trump is not a principled guy. I don't trust him either. And when you listen to him talk, it's just all bullshit. We already saw what he did as president. He's Mr. Operation Warp Speed, Mr. COVID Lockdown, Mr. Take the Guns First and Due Process Later. I don't have any hope he's really going to change things. But getting some of these people around him could help. He's obviously influenced by those people, whether he admits it or not. Vivek got him to come out against CBDCs, for example. But I really don't know. He's not that smart, and he got crushed by the regime last time. So it's really hard to believe anything good will come out of it. But let's hear from Trump himself. I said I was going to break down this Theo interview, and I'm a man of my word. So this came out just a couple of days after I did the Bernie one, and here I am thinking, hey, this will be a great contrast. Someone prominent on the left versus the most prominent man on the right, even though it's not the presidential matchup. It's the matchup that should have been in 2016 if the Democratic Party was actually democratic, but here we are. This is the populist left would-be candidate versus the populist right idol, Donald Trump. And just to give fair warning, there wasn't a ton of substance here. It took half an hour into the thing before I could pull anything useful out. And that's really just it with Trump. He's got the gift of rambling, something I can't do, honestly. Maybe because I take care with what I say. But he can go on and on about anything while saying absolutely nothing. And if you know anything about the subject that he's talking about, if you're even like mediocre on that topic, you know he's completely full of shit. Still, there are a few things here that highlight the comparison between Trump and the left, which we'll see. This clip is the only thing I pulled out of that first half hour because it's the perfect example of his bluster. He's talking about the X Twitter space he did with Elon Musk last week, which I only heard a small clip of it. It was more of the rambling, not that great. Anyway, I know everyone knows by now how Trump talks, but it's just a reminder of what we're dealing with. Here it is.
But I still thought it was exceptional.
I heard the audio was great, and actually they put out a clear tape of it because they had clear tape.
Oh, nice.
They had so many millions and millions of people watching, like record numbers of people. And I'm trying to figure out, we're on a cell phone, or I was, and, you know, that's a lot of people coming into a cell phone one way or the other.
Yeah.
But I heard some people had a problem with the audio. I don't know. I don't do that thing. You know, that was done. And we had a great conversation. It was for 2 hours and 15 minutes. They just put out a clear tape of it, a perfect tape of it. But
I'll have to go back and listen to it.
I think I sounded, somebody said your voice was distorted or something. And you know, I guess it happens. Look, it was such a big thing, such a big audience, but I would have loved to have seen the clear tape originally. They put it out right after the show, so now it's a clear tape where a perfect tape done there.
Yeah.
It was a perfect tape. Some people said the audio was distorted, but we have a perfect tape, and I don't know how so many people could come into one cell phone at the same time. They said it couldn't be done, but we did it. It was the best space ever.
Sorry if that was a horrible Trump impression, but it's fun. He took a whole minute to say that there is a clear recording available. And this is the dude that has inspired a third of the country as a hero. If you ever wonder why I don't have a great love for people in general, why I might just be a little misanthropic, this is why. The people that are idolized in American society are just, well, like this. If you ever think that policy issues are going to win the day in a democratic system, just think of Donald Trump, and Kamala Harris for that matter, and remember why that's a ridiculous idea. This is apparently what wins with people. Bragging about how great you did, talking into a phone, and how many people listen to it. Anyway, after a lot more like this, they finally get to the healthcare topic. It's clearly on Theo's mind from his previous show with Bernie, and something that people should care about. I'm not knocking him at all. It's a big deal. Like I said last time, it's a $4 trillion a year industry, and pharmaceutical companies have a great deal of control over politicians and the media. So this is where we can compare Bernie versus Trump. Let's get into it.
We're one of the only countries that allows drug advertisements and pharmaceutical companies to advertise on television. Like, what do you think are things that you can do to help curtail that when you get in office?
So, well, we did a great job. Does
that make sense or not?
Yes,
that question?
It does make sense. And we had committees, blue ribbon committees in certain cases, but committees that would meet. The big problem we have is, you know, fentanyl is probably the biggest. Opioid is bad. Opioid is bad too.
Yeah.
Okay, I have to pause it there. Man, this guy. Fentanyl is bad. Opioid's bad too. Dude, you have to at least know what you're talking about a little bit here. I'm no expert on drugs by any means, but even I know that fentanyl is an opioid, and it's not just some stupid gaffe. You have to know that people are hooked on fentanyl because the pharmaceutical companies presented fraudulent evidence that got opioids like OxyContin FDA approval in the first place. They knew how addictive it was, and they pushed it anyway. The FDA is supposed to keep us safe by stopping these things from coming on the market, but they do a miserable job at it. So if you don't know that fentanyl is one of those opioids, and that the industry working hand in hand with the FDA created this crisis, there's very little hope that you're going to solve it. But back to the first part of the clip. Theo asks a good question about the advertising for prescription drugs on TV. And the US is one of the only countries that allows that. And it's part of the picture of the broken healthcare situation in America. I thought about bringing this up last episode, but it wasn't quite on point with what Bernie was saying. But it is a big part of it. It's part of the crony, capitalist, media, pharmaceutical oligarchy. I did mention that cable news is paid for very heavily by pharma ads. I only see Fox or CNN on when I'm at the gym, but that's at least half the commercials on there for some new drug that's going to be a magic cure for everything. And then they'll speed through 100 side effects that are often worse than what you started with. And hey, I'm a free market guy. I think they should be able to advertise whatever they want on their own dime. But they wouldn't be able to have so much money to run these ads without the government enabling them. The state lets these companies run mega profits by eliminating real competition. It's a circular relationship. They make a bunch of money, they feed it back to the politicians, then the politicians make sure that the industry people get hired at the FDA, and the FDA favors certain companies that are playing along with the regime. Then they all get very rich off this process. Oh, and they keep the corporate media in business by spending so much on ads and keeping them going. It's one big scam that preys on sick people. And these people, they're incentivized to keep sick forever. But if government wanted to step in and say, no more pharmaceutical ads on TV, I'm not going to put up too much of a fight. Maybe that would be the nail in the coffin for those dying news networks that are nothing more than regime propaganda. But also, the entire medicine industry is corrupted. So given the fact that we do have a government, I'm not going to be upset if they try to correct this and stop it and keep them from scamming people. I really don't think they can, and it's very possible that if they tried, we'll get some worse situation somehow, because that's what government does, make things worse. Anyway, Trump babbles on for a few minutes, but finally comes back to the question.
So just the fact that there's this whole other almost drug government that's there kind of pushing pushing agendas and influencing things. Like, how do we stop that, man? It just seems like it's obviously killing people. Like, people are dying, It's like, what do we have to do that our own government won't help us?
Well, you have to stop listening to lobbyists. I was not a big person for lobbyists. And if they have even a little access to like a president or a senator or a congressman or woman,
they're snakes.
They get a lot of money.
Yeah.
And in some cases, they just take the money. They don't do anything. But you have a lot of lobbyists in Washington pushing, and certainly a lot for all of the things that we're talking about,
but they're
including
winning.
Alcohol.
The lobbyists are winning, it feels like.
Yeah, they're winning. They're making a lot of money.
Just stop listening to lobbyists? That's the plan? That's not going to work, right? I mean, what percentage of people that get elected to Congress do you think have enough integrity to completely shut them out? Maybe 1 in 1,000? I can think of one who I would trust. That's Thomas Massey. But even then, I want receipts. This might sound like the free market option, just opening it up to everyone, except Congress is still there, passing laws that will favor one group over another. They can't possibly possess the wisdom to meet everyone's needs, even if corporate lobbyists somehow were out of the picture. And you're not going to stop that. And of course, people that enter politics are generally not the ones to trust in the first place. The people that are drawn to these positions of power and status over others, are precisely the ones that shouldn't be trusted with them. So even if you get lucky and elect the one good guy, it's just a matter of time before he's voted out and the next bad guy comes in. And his campaign is going to be well funded by the exact big money interests we're trying to combat. The system is not going to work. And Trump even says, yeah, the lobbyists are winning. But can he stop it? Let's go on.
Can you stop that? Can a president stop that? Like, how do we stop that?
Well, one way you could stop it is to say, if you're going to go into government, you can never be a lobbyist. In many cases, they have rules and regulations where you can't do it for 4 years, 3 years, 5 years, whatever.
You mean be a lobbyist after you were an elected official?
I mean, you could
Is that what you're saying?
you could say that if you're an elected official or if you work in government, you can never be a lobbyist. You have people that work in government and they give out contracts to the military, and then they leave and they work for the people that they're giving out contracts to.
That's exactly what happened with the Sackler family with the drug companies. They hired people that were on the FDA to work for them so they could loophole the laws.
Yeah.
Theo is exactly right on this one. I've talked about this many times, that there's just a revolving door between the big companies and the regulatory agencies that are supposed to be keeping them from monopolizing a market. And it's the agencies that instead enable them to become real monopolies. Or they might have a few different companies that basically control the market, so they can say that, oh, we're not technically a monopoly. And they're okay with that because there's still a lot of money to go around, and they don't have to deal with the people who will come around and try to give them a hard time for being a true monopoly. Then Trump says we can't really stop them because there are constitutional things in the way. Things like free speech, that old chestnut.
Or, but can we outlaw lobbyists, or we can't do that?
Well, there's a whole constitutional thing there. I mean, can you make somebody never ever go into the business if you work for government, and especially if you're giving out contracts? In other words, you're a powerful person within some industry, the Navy, the Army, anything. It could be military procurement, etc. There's a whole thing there's a whole question as to you give out a contract and then all of a sudden you're working for the person you gave out the contract to, or the company that you gave out the contract to.
Right. It's like you're playing both sides in the net.
Well, it's obviously a problem, and it's a big problem, and we were doing things about it, but then we had to get down to other business. We had to solve we had a lot of problems with this country.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, he's kind of right. You can't really outlaw lobbying, not because it's unconstitutional. They really don't care about that. But because no matter what you do, they'll find a way around it. You're not going to stop politicians from talking to people. It's just not possible in any realistic way. But in his rambling way, Trump does appear to have at least a basic understanding of this problem. The lobbyists go get their deals, promising campaign funds, or also what he refers to here is the promise of a cushy job after they're done with their term. So you leave the Senate, you leave the House, and suddenly you got a nice board seat at Lockheed Martin or Pfizer or whatever. This is one of the things I used to rail on Nikki Haley for. She left government and went to work for Boeing, where she helped kill an initiative that would have forced them to disclose their spending to influence politicians and the safety regulators. Then, these companies also pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for ex-politicians to come give a speech to the employees. And I don't care who you are, you're not providing $300,000 in value giving a 1-hour speech. Hillary Clinton is another one that has done a lot of these. And it's just so obviously corrupt, and it shouldn't be happening. But there's not a great way to stop it, because they're not incentivized to. And one thing that the medical lobbyists wanted to kill was having to be upfront about their prices. Bernie talked about this too, and that's something that he and Trump are actually in agreement on. So there is one way Trump tried to help the healthcare costs, by executive order. Let's go on.
Because hospitals and insurance companies get away with hiding their prices from all of us, and literally they can charge whatever they want. It's like you sign up and say, yes, I'll pay. You trust the hospital, but then you get home and the bill it's whatever, which pretty much feels like some form of extortion to me. That's what it seems like to me.
It's a form. Yeah.
But you had an executive order where you created a federal rule forcing hospitals and insurers to publish all their prices.
Yep.
Right? So that people would be able to know, okay, if an MRI costs $600 here and it's $5,000 there, then I can go here and save myself money.
Right.
But that hasn't even been enforced. Like hospitals,
Biden got away with it.
Hospitals and insurance companies, they're still not showing their prices.
They hated it.
Of course they did.
And because it would have made it very competitive, and Biden let it go. He never enforced it. And to get that approved was a big deal.
So yes, he did in 2019 sign an executive order mandating price transparency in hospitals. And I do think that transparency is a good thing. The problem with this, though, is that, well, for one, it's an executive order. That means that the next president can just throw it out on a whim, and they're not fully legally binding. They technically only apply to executive branch agencies like the FDA, for example. So in a roundabout way, they can get some enforcement on it, but it's a half-assed way to go about it. On principle, an executive order is not something I support. It's one person trying to dictate the law, and every president uses it. This isn't something unique to Trump at all, but I still don't like it. So here's another thing that Trump did in office to try to help the costs.
But no, one thing I liked about Bernie, well, one of the things is the healthcare. I just feel like we spend so much money in different places and people are sick, and the opioid epidemic. I just feel like, and the lower cost of drugs, those are things that
because I got insulin down and they took credit for it, but I got it down to $35. And I said, I hope I win because somebody's going to take credit. It takes a period of time before it kicks in statutorily. And I got it down to $35, which is a very low price. And they took credit for it, which is, now I'm taking credit because I'm talking to you,
well, yeah, if you did it, then you should be able to take credit for it.
Okay, so I have a lot to say on this one. Trump was very proud of his price caps on insulin, but what he did was cap the out-of-pocket expense for some Medicare patients at $35 a month, mandating that the government insurance covers the rest. This does nothing to stop the drug companies from charging too high of prices, of course. They could potentially charge even more because, like I talked about last time, the incentives for people to seek out better prices are gone. And the rest of that money is coming out of our pockets one way or another. So then people might think, well, okay, just cap the price that drug companies can charge to the insurance. And if you saw in the last week or so, Kamala Harris also came out in support of price controls. And probably next time I'm putting her on blast. And it doesn't matter who does it. So Trump and Kamala, you get the same treatment. Price controls do not work. Putting a limit on what a company can charge for a product will do one or more of a few things. It's going to drastically reduce the supply. If companies can't make a profit on a product, they're going to stop making and selling it. If they can still make a little profit, but they can make more profit with a different product, they will stop selling the product or at least limit it to a very small part of their offerings. So insulin is one of those things that you do not want shortages of, unless you want a bunch of diabetics to start dying off. You'll drastically reduce the quality. If there's still any incentive to create the product, companies are going to cut every corner they can to save on costs. And yes, of course, they already do that to some extent, but they're incentivized even further to create poor quality products. So who knows what you're getting? Third, you're going to create black markets. So if you're smart, you're going to call me out and say, well, isn't that just a free market? And I would say the difference, at least what I'm talking about here, is that black markets have to operate undercover. They have to hide things from government regulators, and they have difficulty getting access to good quality ingredients because those are so regulated as well. So again, you have to worry more about the quality here when you get black market dealers selling knockoff drugs with who knows what in it. They could be selling fake drugs or more toxic drugs, leading to more illness and death. And to what little extent the FDA is actually looking out for safety, you've lost that. And finally, you're going to kill competition. Maybe there's one mega corporation that can afford to take the financial hit and set up a mass manufacturing process that can remain financially viable. You now have a monopoly on the market, and guess what? They're going to lobby the government to change the rules to keep their monopoly and to be able to raise their prices right back up. So we're back to the original problem all over again, this time with a true monopoly power that can only be preserved by the state. Because if you allowed a free market, none of this could have happened in the first place. When one company starts to raise prices arbitrarily, another one can step in with lower prices and take their business. When it's so heavily regulated, that becomes nearly impossible. So who's responsible for all this? It's a good question. Well, the people in charge of the House and Senate are just as culpable as any president in the scheme to keep the big money interests happy. Let's see some more.
Who's behind the healthcare, insurance, that whole thing? Like, who's behind it all? It feels like Chuck Schumer is this kind of like deviant mastermind back there somewhere.
Well, he's one of the people that is hurt, and he's one of the people that keeps the prices high. And he's, gets a lot of contributions from the people on the other side. And him and plenty of other people, a lot of people. It's a very powerful lobby.
But wouldn't they? Why do
the
they
most
want
powerful
people?
lobby? The lawyer lobby.
That's the
That feeds into that also. It all feeds into it.
Wait, hold on, just so I understand, Donald. Sorry. So that lobby is a very powerful one.
Yeah.
But why do those people want people to suffer though? Just so they can make money?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it really has to do with money.
So I've always thought that Schumer was a bad guy, but I didn't know about his ties to Big Pharma. I had to look this up when I heard it because I had not heard about Schumer in relation to the healthcare stuff at all. But it turns out that during his 2022 campaign, he pulled in over $350,000 in donations from pharma donors. And he's gotten over $1.5 million in his career. 8 of the top 10 recipients in the Senate from the pharma industry are Democrats too, by the way, which helps to explain why they were so much in favor of the COVID shots. And this is not from some right-wing media site either. I found all this data on Jacobin, a very hard-left publication. That said, it's not just Schumer that's responsible for this. It's the system that allows or even encourages this. Of course, you're going to have this happen when the lawmakers are open for business. When you're spending millions and millions of dollars for a job that pays a couple $100,000 a year, you know something's wrong with that equation. That money comes from people who want the rules made in their favor. And what Theo says about them wanting people to suffer, I don't know that they all want that necessarily. Mostly they just don't care. They don't care if people suffer. Building their status and wealth is much more important to them than whatever bad consequences might come to some poor people as a result. It's sociopathic, even psychopathic behavior, but to be a politician is another one of those jobs where you pretty much cannot be a good person. Even if there really are well-intentioned people that get in, if you stay in it and play along with the game, you can't be good. Unless you're in there actively trying to shut it down. Okay, so that's about all they got on the healthcare issue. There's not too much of substance there to criticize. I like price transparency, but it shouldn't have to come as a law from the government. It's the systems we have in place that allow that to run rampant. The insurance system pushed onto employers rather than the customers is one element of that removal of incentives that keeps things honest. That was put into place by government. And now because your wages are reduced to pay for this crazy expensive insurance, you can't choose to spend that money on your own plan or save it or use a private doctor that can keep prices lower because they don't have to deal with the insurance system. It's also drug companies working hand in hand with the regulators to make sure their drugs are on the standards of care that insurance is then forced to pay for. They manipulate the patent system so that they can charge a 10,000% markup on pills. These are not free market failures. They're symptoms of government corruption. So honestly, from this conversation, there isn't too much difference in the preferred policy between Bernie and Trump. And that should tell you something about the state of politics today. The supposed far left and far right representatives have very similar policy prescriptions. They both want to use government as a tool to force people to do things that they supposedly believe are going to help. And those things never help because central planning doesn't work. It doesn't make things better. Only for a select few. So it's tempting to look at Trump and all the attacks he gets from the media and the uniparty and look at who he's putting around him now and think, maybe there's something here. The people he's starting to put around him, I feel like some of them are good. I like some of what they say. And looking at the other side, I don't see anything good. And it really seems like the regime does not want you to have a real choice and select Trump. But you just have to listen to the guy talk. And for me, that shred of hope really quickly falls away. Look at what happened in his first term, and you should get a good idea of what to expect. Yeah, maybe he learned at least a couple things from it. It could be slightly better, and maybe it's less destructive than a Harris presidency might be. But to think he's going to come in and slash things and be some libertarian hero, that's not going to happen. So look, do whatever you want as far as voting. If that's your guy, okay. I'll be very happy to be wrong if he really does change things for the better. I just have a hard time believing it. So I'll end it there. I hope that gave people some insight. I think it's always good to remember that none of these people are going to save you. The odds that their interests align with yours, even 50% of the time, is very unlikely. Even with a hypothetical perfect candidate, the entrenched power in the government is not going to let them fix it. Even if they let him win the election, you know they have insurance policies to keep him from doing anything. So, really the only way is to build parallel systems that can replace those government functions. That's way more valuable than voting. So get out there, build something, share this with other people. If you want more, I started writing some articles, and you can find them on my X profile at Drop the Mask Pod. The first one is very relevant to this. It's called Politicians Can't and Won't Save You. So go check it out. Give me a follow, leave a comment. I really like interacting with you guys there. Anyway, thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.